New pieces are being added to this geopolitical chess match. Sweden and Finland, historically non-aligned, are now joining NATO.
For the Russians, this is really the nightmare coming true, and Putin wanted to have less NATO along his borders, and now he is getting much more NATO along his borders.
NATO has promised to fast-track the applications. NATO is also deploying more forces to the Baltics, its so-called eastern flank, and it's more explicitly targeted Russia in a new strategic concept.
It makes clear that Russia poses the most significant and direct threat to our security.
Russia has denounced the posturing and suggested it may beef up its northern bases.
In regard to Finland and Sweden, we don't have problems with Finland and Sweden. That, unfortunately, we have with Ukraine. We have no territorial disputes with them. There's nothing that might concern us in terms of Finland and Sweden becoming NATO members. If they want to, please go ahead. But they should clearly understand that they didn't face any threats before. Now, if NATO troops and infrastructure are deployed, we will be compelled to respond in kind and create the same threats for the territories from which these threats towards us are created. It's obvious. What? Don't they understand that? Everything was going fine between us, but now there will be tensions. There certainly will. This is obvious and inevitable, I repeat, if there is a threat to us.
NATO is effectively the most powerful player in the Arctic, a far cry from the remit from its founding.
As in the State Auditorium, representatives of 12 nations of Western Europe and North America assemble for the signing of the North Atlantic Treaty.
The North Atlantic Treaty Organization was formed in 1948 to counter the Soviet Union.
This treaty is a simple document. The nations which sign it agree to abide by the peaceful principles of the United Nations, to maintain friendly relations and economic cooperation with one another, to consult together whenever the territory or independence of any of them is threatened, and to come to the aid of any one of them who may be attacked.
Despite American promises it would not expand east of a reunified Germany, NATO has now stretched to Russia's doorstep. 27 nations are now part of the alliance, whose members agree an attack on one is an attack on all. While NATO claims to exist to protect peace, its attacks on Libya, Serbia and Afghanistan have called that into question.
Today we can see that NATO does in some ways work as a defense force, for example for the Baltic countries, which are now, I think, very happy to be members of NATO. But earlier in history, you don't need to go very far back to see how NATO has worked more as an aggressor than they have as someone who's working for peace and stability.
Critics also claim NATO was deliberately provoking Russia before February's invasion of Ukraine. They point to NATO sending military trainers into Ukraine and NATO hinting at Ukraine's addition into the alliance.
Before the war started, I told Putin that if he invaded Ukraine, NATO would not only get stronger, but would get more united.
NATO is increasing in size and power, adding more members from and military assets to the Arctic. That more closely ties the fate of the region to the alliance.